Hi everyone, this is Nia and today I'm going to be painting this warm morning scene. I used a reference picture for this one and I thought that the color combination of the warm colors with the light green grass is really interesting, so let's begin. Like usual, I'm just going to first mask off the edges of my page and then secure the sides to the rest of my watercolor pad. Once I'm done, I'm just going to sketch or map out the painting first. And this is the reference picture that I used, and I'm just going to map out a few things on the paper with pencil as indication. The first thing I placed was the horizon line because I want a clear separation between the land and the sky, and I tend to make the horizon line slightly lower than what I expect to paint. I also draw out the main stem of the tree and indicate a few main branches as well as the height and width of the tree very lightly so I get a clear estimation of the scale of this tree. For the fence, I just draw out a crooked diagonal line. I'm not going to draw every single piece of wood because it's just going to most likely be covered by paint. For the sun, I also indicate a circle that is slightly larger than what the intended sun should be, but I want to do this very lightly. You can make it lighter than mine here, as mine showed a bit through the light transparent paint at the end, so you can erase some parts to make it even lighter if you can. Next, here are the colors that I'll be using. Firstly, this is Jaune Brilliant No. 2 by Holbein, followed with Gold Brown by Shmincke, Quin Red by Daniel Smith, Hansa Yellow Light by Daniel Smith, Viridian by Holbein, Ultramarine Deep by Holbein, Sepia by Holbein, and also Bleed Proof White by Dr. P.H. Martens. Okay, so let's begin to paint. I'm going to start out by wetting my whole paper first. Like usual, I just want an even distribution without the paper being puddling wet. I'm going to start with the top of the sky. For that, I'm going to use a mixture of Quin Red and Jaune Brilliant No. 2 to create a pink. And I'm just going to place this right at the top. And as I get towards the bottom, I want to change the color to become lighter. So I'm just going to follow it up by using Jaune Brilliant by itself. So it goes from a pink to a soft orange pastel color. And while doing this, I'm also going to start thinking about the sun. So I'm going to avoid painting around that area that I drew out before. And because the surface is still damp, I want to leave out a larger negative space for the sun, so the paint has a bit of extra space for the paint to spread inwards without completely covering the circle. As I get lower to the page, I added a bit of Hansa Yellow Light to Jaune Brilliant, and afterwards I'm just going to use Hansa Yellow by itself, followed with just a clean damp brush to soften the blend until it connects to the horizon. After I have all the color mixtures, I'm just going to even out the color and add more pigment where I need to and just soften the transition between colors by moving the paint around with my brush. For the horizon, I like to mix up a few colors so the grass has different colors, from the warm yellow-green to pinks to soft maroons and yellows. So I'm just starting out with a mixture of Viridian, Hansa Yellow Light, and Gold Brown to create the green. And I also want to mix this up with the pink from earlier. And I'm just going to use this to paint the bushes on top of the horizon. Doing this while the surface is still damp so the paint can spread from the wet on wet effect. I'm just going to basically paint the land with a medium consistency all throughout because I just want to map out a little bit of the base color. For the bushes at the right, I wanted to make it a bit more yellow, so I added Hansa Yellow Light and a bit of Jaune Brilliant. As for the rest of the grass, I'm just going to start with a warm yellow-green mix from Viridian, Hansa Yellow, Gold Brown, and a little bit of Quin Red to warm it up even more, but I do want to vary the color slightly as I add on more pigment. I'm just going to spread it out very roughly with added water, and then I'm also going to add a bit more pigment so the color is a bit uneven. And as I get towards the bottom of the grass area, I want the color to be a bit darker. So for the dark green, I just added Ultramarine Deep to the previous mix. It's still going to be pretty light for now, but that's okay because we're still going to layer on more color on top of this later. Notice that I'm holding my brush mostly horizontally when I'm painting the grassland. This is because I want to depict the flat plane for now and then add the grass texture as we go. But moving on to the base color where the fence is going to be, I want the color to be a bit more brown. So I used the same green mix as before, but I just added more gold brown to the Viridian and yellow. And as I get closer towards the foreground where I want the color to be a bit more richer with the red, I just added Quin Red to the previous mix. As the paint starts to settle and spread, I want to break up the color a bit more. So as an example, for the dark green patches, sometimes I like to add a lighter green, or for the areas where it has more green, I like to break it up by adding a bit more of the brown mixture. The same thing goes to the left side as well, and I'm just going to place the colors quite randomly, but I'm still going to use the reference picture more or less for the color and the direction of light. Like usual, these things doesn't have to be accurate. They're just a depiction of what we see and what we want to put down on paper, so don't be scared of experimenting a little bit with colors. And anyway, this is just the base. We can still layer on more colors after this. So after I've placed most of the base color down, I just want to make sure that the paper is dry, so I just used my hairdryer to make it nice and quick. Next, I feel like the yellow in the sky can be a bit more saturated, so I'm going to fix the sky and also paint the tree. For this, I do want to work on a wet surface, so I'm going to use clean water to dampen the whole portion of the sky while avoiding the sun this time. My Hansa yellow has a bit of green, so I'm just going to clean it up before I use it. If not, the green will most probably taint the color of the sky. On the left of my palette, I mixed up a brown from a mix of Quin Red, Gold Brown, and Jaune Brilliant, but I'm just going to darken it a bit more by adding more Quin Red and a little bit of Sepia. I'm going to use this while the surface of the sky is still wet, and I'm just going to dot this around with my brush to paint the edges of the tree. According to the picture, the branches are so fine at the edges that it would be too overcrowded to paint it as single branches, which is why I'm just going to use the wet on wet technique to let the color bloom softly and simplify the painting. On the right, where the tree is closer to the sun, I used yellow with a bit of Quin Red to make the color lighter and a bit more orange, which adds that bit of glowing effect. So on top and the left, where the sun isn't hitting directly on the branches, I want the color to be a bit more red-brown, and the right side to be more yellow and golden. After this, I want to paint the branches, and I do want clean edges to paint with more detail, so I'm just going to dry off the paper before I paint it on. I'm going to begin by painting the stem of the tree using the same brown mix, and I'm using my size 2 round brush here so the line can be a bit more thick. For this, I'm using a medium to thick consistency. Then I also realized at the bottom I don't want the tree to look like it grew out of nowhere, so I decided to add a little bit of green grass right underneath, and I just blurred out the bottom of the stem before I continue on to paint the branches. For the branches, I'm just going to paint a few main ones with the same brush first. I am using the reference to get an idea of the movement and how it curves. And after I've painted a few, I'm going to switch to my liner brush to add finer branches this time so the shape can be a bit more fluid. Just like the blurry branches, I'm going to make these finer branches a bit more yellow on the right hand side closest to the sun by adding Jaune Brilliant and Hansa Yellow in the mix. You can see how I use my palette here. When I mix colors, I try to not mix them completely so I can have access to the darker version of the color as well whenever I need it. Some of the branches that I've painted are a bit light, so I decided to go over some of them again using this dark color. I'm not going to go over every single one of them though, because the difference in values also help with the depth and the position of the branch. After you've loaded your brush, that's when you'll have the most paint on your brush and also the darkest value, but as your brush runs out of paint, the load will become a bit more of a dry brush and the value can also be a bit lighter. So after I freshly load my brush, I usually like to paint the larger branches, and when the load starts to run out and my lines become a bit lighter and thinner, I try to paint the finer branches around the edges of the tree. After I have a good amount of branches, I'm going to add dry brush textures around the tree. Just like the previous elements and layers, I want the dry brush texture to be a bit more yellow on the right hand side closest to the sun and a bit more red-brown as it moves to the left hand side. I'm using my soft size 0 brush for this, and I use full pressure so the brush lies flat on its side, and I just press and wiggle the brush around in order to get the dry brush texture. According to the reference image, there are light fine branches at the lower part of the tree stem, so I'm just going to add it on lightly with the dry brush load so the fine branches stay nice and subtle. You can also leave this out if you don't like it in your composition though. Once I'm done with the tree, I'm going to move on to the grass area again. I'm just going to glaze over the grass area with a light to medium consistency paint. As I look at the reference, I feel like the color is a bit more warm on the left, so I use the same brown with a bit of Hansa yellow from the tree in a thin consistency, and as for the right hand side, I just use Hansa yellow to glaze over the top portion of the grass closest to the light source. For the bottom of the grass on the right hand side, I used the previous green mixture with added Ultramarine Deep. Then I'm going to follow this up using the same reddish brown mix from the tree with added Jaune Brilliant to paint the area for the line of the fence. I'm going to add a bit more colors in a thicker consistency for the grass on the right. I added sepia in the green mix, and I paint random horizontal lines on the right hand side. As I get further away at the top, I made the line weight a bit thinner and thicker as I get closer to the foreground to build perspective. For the darker value at the bottom area, I added sepia and ultramarine deep to the previous green mixture. I'm building the texture just like before with thicker line weight at the bottom, and as I get further to the top, I use a lighter green mixture with a thinner line weight that is closer together. You can see from the reference image that the grass isn't completely flat, so I want to build that uneven surface by using the lines to act as shadows. Moving on to the next area, I'm going to mix the dark green to the red-brown from earlier and build on the color for the fence line. As I get towards the top, though, I added more Hansa yellow to make the color a bit brighter. Despite the color looking quite vivid, this is actually quite a light consistency, so it's going to dry pretty light. I'm going to add a bit of grass texture on the left using an orange mix from the pink with added Hansa yellow, and later with a bit of green. I'm starting with my size 2 brush and I'm just flicking upwards to cover large areas, but then after that I'm going to follow this up using my size 0 brush to create really fine grass textures. You can see from the reference picture that the left side is a bit more blurry and hazy, which is why I'm only using a light consistency for the grass texture on the left, and I'm going to add a little bit in comparison to how much vividness of the color and detail we have on the right hand side. After this, I'm going to be painting the fence. So for this, I do want the left side of the grass to be fairly done since the fence is going to go over the grass on the left. Before I paint though, I do feel like it would be better to draw it out first so I can figure out the placement and also the perspective of the painting. Like the reference image, I'd like to play with the tilts, making the wood look more rustic, and I also want to take into consideration the height and distance between the wood. The closer the wood is to the foreground, they're going to be larger, taller, and also further apart compared to the ones further away. Before I start to paint, I wet the grass area underneath the fence so the paint can blur out. After that, I mixed in Quin Red, Gold Brown, and Sepia, and I'm going to use a thick consistency to paint the base color of the fence. As I get closer to the sun, I add Hansa yellow light to the previous mix, and this is to keep the glow of the sun consistent all throughout the painting. Next, I want to add sepia to the brown mix in a thick consistency, and I'm going to layer on the dark brown on parts of the fence to give it a bit of dimension. I used the reference image to help me with the placement of the darker values, and as I get to the lighter fences at the back, I used a slightly thinner consistency and leave out the lightest fence with the added Hansa yellow as is. Whenever it's hard to paint smaller details, you can always switch to a smaller brush for better control. After that, I used the first brown mix from Quin Red, Gold Brown, and Sepia in a thin consistency to paint the wiring to connect the fence, and for this I used my liner brush so the lines can be very delicate and thin. Next, I'm going to add the grass texture underneath the fence. I used Jaune Brilliant with the brown from earlier, and as I get closer to the sun, I added Hansa yellow to make the color brighter. After this, I'm going to add light details using bleed proof white as the base color, but I mixed it with a little bit of Jaune Brilliant, the Hansa yellow, and also the brown mix so it's not too white. I'm going to place this around the fence, and then with more Jaune Brilliant and Quin Red added to the bleed proof white, I'm also going to paint some vegetation using my smallest brush so I can create really fine lines for the grass. For a bit more detail to the grass, I'm going to use the same mix but with added bleed-proof white, and I'm going to lengthen the height of the grass and try to depict something like Kogan grass. As for the bottom section of the grass, I use a thick consistency of the brown mixture from earlier, which is a mixture of Quin Red, Jaune Brilliant, and Gold Brown, and this time I added sepia to darken it further. After I feel like I have enough details for the fence, I'm going to work on the grass on the right hand side. I made dark green from Ultramarine Deep, Viridian, and Sepia, and I use a thick consistency with my size 0 brush held horizontally, and I just flick upwards to paint the grass texture in a dry brush consistency. As I get further to the top, I added gold brown to lighten the green, but I'm still working in a thick consistency and I'm just painting it the same way as before. But because the distance is further away, I made sure that the grass isn't as tall as the ones that I painted in the foreground, and I also made the spacing a bit closer together to help with perspective. At the back, I added a peach color from Quin Red, Jaune Brilliant, and Hansa Yellow, and going back to the midsection of the grass again, I also decided to add some pink details, like the reference picture in a thick consistency from Jaune Brilliant and Quin Red added to the green mix. I think the details are quite balanced all throughout, but I do want to add little light accents. I'm going to use a light pink color with added bleed-proof white to just paint on some dots and also little bits of splatters on the grass beneath the fence and also for the foreground on the right hand side. And this is just to suggest little wildflowers or specks of dust reflected by the sunlight. Lastly, I want to add a little bits of details like delicate wildflowers with a dark brown mix, and I also want to add small bits of highlights around the fence and also tiny fine branches for the bushes at the back using a pink mix with a thin consistency so the detail stays very light and subtle in the composition. But as for your own painting, feel free to add any final touch-ups that you would feel would enhance the composition. This is optional and depends on how good your circle is for the sun. Mine was a bit crooked, so I decided to clean the edges with bleed-proof white, and once I'm done, I'm going to unmask and reveal the painting. I found a little smear on the left here, so I decided to clean it up with bleed-proof white. So this is the final painting. I don't think I've played with pinks and greens together for scenery before, so this was a really interesting experience for me with a new color palette. Like usual, all the list of tools as well as my social media links will be in my description box. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching till the end, and I'll see you at the next one. Bye!